Once upon a time, in a country far, far away, there lived a man who had two sons. The younger son had a bit of a rebellious streak in him, and so one day he went to his father and said, "Dad, I want my share of the inheritance now, before you die." Now, friends, even in our culture, that would be seen as quite disrespectful. But in that time and in that place, it was extremely rude and terribly shocking, because he was sort of saying to his father, "I wish you would just die so that I can have what I want and do what I want. But since you won't die, I want what should be mine now." And instead of responding in an equivalent, equally hostile way, the father actually agreed to divide his wealth between his two sons. And while the elder one didn't take his inheritance, but instead stayed with his father, the younger one kept to his plan. He packed up what he wanted to keep and sold the rest and set off to a distant land with a fortune in his pocket. And there, I want to say that he lived a good life, but he lived a wild life. And it didn't take him long to waste everything his father gave him on women, wine, and song. And in the end, he was left with nothing. And then, to add insult to injury, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the country. And even people with money were struggling. And so you can just imagine, he had it really tough and was literally starving. So in absolute desperation, he managed to persuade a local farmer to hire him. And this guy sent him into his fields to feed his pigs. Now, just a little side note, the younger son came from a culture where it was improper to even be close to pigs. Yet now, as he was watching them, he started envying them, because at least they had something to eat. It was as though even pigs were higher on the pecking order than he was. He was as low and as rock bottom as you could go. And the worst was that he knew he brought it on himself. And as this thought dawned on him, he came to his senses and thought that even the lowliest servants in his father's employment were better treated than he was at that moment. And so he decided that he would go back to his father and simply say, "Dad, I am so, so sorry. I've sinned against God and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son, but please, will you take me on as a servant?" And so without wasting any more time, he immediately got up and started walking home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, because every day he was standing in front of his house hoping that his son would return to him. And the moment he saw him in the distance, his heart was so filled with compassion and love that he picked up his robes and started running down the lane towards his long-lost son, who treated him with so much disrespect. And when he got to him, he grabbed him in his arms and embraced him and said, my son, you've come home." But the son responded with his rehearsed speech and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I've sinned against God and I've sinned against you, and I've forfeited my right to be your child. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Just treat me as one of your servants." But the father, still beaming, turned to his servants and said, "Quick now, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Fetch a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And go and prepare the finest meal you can, because we are going to have the most amazing feast you've ever seen. Because you see, this son of mine, who was dead, is alive again. He was broken and he is whole again. He was lost, but now he is found." So friends, maybe you feel a little lost as well. Maybe it feels to you as though you've brought it over yourself and you don't know how to ever fix what had been broken. May I just encourage you to get up and take the way home, because your Heavenly Father is waiting for you with open arms. Go to Him, because if you are broken, He can make you whole. If you feel dead, He can give you new life. And if you are lost, you can be found again.